Well, well, well. Bit by bit, I feel like we are starting to fully piece together all we need to know about the latest sweepstakes that the Montreal Canadiens ended up winning. Of course, we are talking about the Patrik Laine sweepstakes because he ultimately got traded from the Columbus Blue Jackets to the Montreal Canadiens, and a lot of people, myself included, were very excited to see this all go down. Now, the thing is, we did hear from all the insiders reporting on the Patrik Laine situation that there were a number of teams that were involved, a number of offers and other hypothetical situations that were brought up, and we even made a video already going over one of the rejected trade proposals that was discussed with the Columbus Blue Jackets. That was the rejected trade idea to the Philadelphia Flyers. But in this video, we're going over onto an article that dives into yet another one of these rejected trade ideas. We're going on to the Minnesota Star Tribune, and an article published by Lavelle E. Neal III. Now, I'm going to be honest, this is a really strange sort of website because the Minnesota Star Tribune is behind a paywall, but this particular article is available if you wanted to get their free access, which you don't need to sign up for, you don't need to pay anything. There is an avenue that you could go down to access this article for free. So even though most of the Minnesota Star Tribune stuff is paywalled, I do feel comfortable going out there and screenshotting this piece. The Wild wanted Patrik Laine, but Laine did not want the Wild, as we had said, published by Lavelle E. Neal III from August 31st, 2024. So this article is almost 2 weeks old now, and there is a juicy enough scoop in it to go out there, I would say, and have a conversation about this topic. So the article will be linked in the description if you want to see more of this yourself, but the main idea is indeed revealed at the very start of the piece here. Take a look at how everything begins. Winger Patrik Laine got what he wanted. He was dealt from Columbus to Montreal on August 19th to get a fresh start following a difficult 23-24 season, during which he battled injury and spent time in the NHL's Players Assistance Program. Yeah, that's not new news. We've kind of known about that the entire time he got traded, though. It's too bad he couldn't launch his comeback with the Minnesota Wild. But what can GM Bill Guerin do when a player doesn't want to come here? Bill Guerin joined the writer of this article, Lavelle E. Neal III, at the State Fair on Thursday to discuss the Wild's offseason and approaching training camp. He engaged Columbus about trading for Laine, which would have been complicated because the player is earning $8.7 million in each of the next 2 seasons, and Wild's salary cap space is limited. Guerin said he had made progress on a deal and believed he had a chance to complete a trade, until he couldn't. When I asked him if Laine wanted to come to the Twin Cities, Guerin said no. That suggests, and what I suspect is, Laine had the Wild on a no-trade list. So this is the scoop that we had. This is just from the introduction of the article. You don't even need to get past the paywall to see this. But hearing that Patrik Laine and the Minnesota Wild was a deep enough conversation to the point where Bill Guerin thought he could have made the trade happen does kind of get me wondering, okay, what were the negotiations like between Columbus and Minnesota? I'd think that for most NHL teams, it's probably common knowledge that an NHL player's no-trade list has to be known, right? Like, before you start negotiating with a team, it would be really stupid if a team like Columbus, for example, knew the 10 teams that Patrik Laine had on his no-trade list. They said, oh, Minnesota is on the no-trade list. Let's start negotiating with Minnesota. Unless the NHL has some sort of a different system where teams and GMs don't really know what teams are on the NHL players' no-trade lists. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me entirely if that was the case, considering the Evgeny Dadonov shenanigans that happened a few years ago. If I recall correctly, that situation was crazy because it was like the Vegas Golden Knights just did not receive a no-trade list from Ottawa. Apparently, it was their responsibility to get that done. Either way, no trade lists are an interesting thing because while they do have so much power, At times like these, you start to question how accessible they really are to the teams that are negotiating these assets. Because if Patrik Laine had the Minnesota Wild in his no-trade list from the beginning, then what point would there have been for the Blue Jackets to entertain any sort of a trade idea with Bill Guerin, especially to the point where he himself feels like he could have gotten the trade done? If anything, maybe the Blue Jackets called up Laine and they were like, hey, we're sending you over to Minnesota, or we got a trade in place, and then he was like, no, sorry, that team is on my no trade. Or you could hypothesize that because Patrik Laine had all these extra circumstances, because he's so expensive, $8.7 million, because he wasn't available for most of the previous season, would it not have been fair for the Minnesota Wild or the Blue Jackets, any one of these parties, to ask Laine, hey, we got a trade, it'll send you to Minnesota, how do you feel about that? If Patrik Laine has the ability to say, yeah, I kind of don't really feel the Wild, I'm not really feeling them as an organization or as a destination, if that possibility exists, which I don't know if it would because Laine is only restricted to a 10-team no-trade, but from the way this entire conversation unfolded, it seems like there might have been some sort of a Laine decision involved in it, then maybe that's something that you could say also came into play. Because I'm thinking about it like this. We heard already that Philadelphia was in the mix for Laine. They had a 1-for-1 trade, him for Ryan Johansson, that was on the table, but inevitably it was rejected. Most probably due to Laine having Philadelphia on his no-trade list, or because of the idea that he did not want to play with John Tortorella again. So when you think about it like that, my mindset kind of goes, okay, we've heard about 2 teams now that Laine did not go to, or did not accept a trade to, or was not allowed to get traded to because of the 10-team no-trade list. What are the odds that we're hearing all these extra teams that are coming out when there are only 10 teams out of 32 that would have been involved here? Like, it's kind of rare, I'd think, to see players get traded with modified no-trade protection only to see a bunch of these teams that were not able to get the trade done popping up out of the ground. We're hearing Minnesota, we're hearing Philadelphia. It does kind of get my gears turning a little bit, but of course, you know, this is just one idea out of many that you can use to talk about Patrik Laine. The rest of the article on the Minnesota Star Tribune dives into what the possibilities could have been like. Oh, would he have played with Dalla Bill Kirill? Would he have done this? He would have done that. And I'd say the writer here, Lavelle E. Neal III, does a pretty good job at just going over the hypotheticals, and then the rest of the piece goes out there and talks about some other guys, Matt Boldy, Marco Rossi. Again, the link is going to be in the description if you want to see more of that. But Laine in Minnesota, that actually would not have been too bad of a fit in my opinion, especially if you try to play Kirill with Laine. Maybe he's the extra guy that they could have really used to bolster up their forward core and their offensive productivity to being an actual threat. Because goodness gracious, we all know that the Minnesota Wild have been kind of hovering around that middle tier-ish NHL team territory for so long. It's been kind of ridiculous, to be honest, and they have shown some signs of life, some signs of getting over the hump over the years, but they always seem to regress back to mediocrity, which is very unfortunate. A guy like Patrik Laine playing with Kirill Kaprizov probably could have been a huge change to that narrative, but I guess we'll never know, will we? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about the idea that Patrik Laine rejected a trade to Minnesota, or he may not have just been able to get traded to Minnesota after the negotiations with Bill Guerin seemed to have gone somewhere to a reasonable extent. Thoughts in the comment section as to how you think Laine could have done with the Minnesota Wild, and what are your thoughts on what the return could have been? If you think about the fact that Laine and a second got traded for Jordan Harris, just those 3 assets involved, and the fact that Laine went over to Montreal with no salary retained, what do you think the trade idea with Minnesota would have entailed too? In fact, I'm starting to think more so in that territory because, hey, it was a pretty big key for Montreal to be able to get the trade done that they did not need to retain salary. Minnesota probably would not have been able to do that. Does that change the trade return significantly in your opinion, and by how much? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about Laine and the Minnesota Wild. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.